Okay. Good afternoon from this side, and we can just kickstart and start immediately. Today's lecture day 4, or better still, week 4 of our lecture. Next week we are going to be writing a formative assessment of what we have covered thus far in the course of the lecture. So we'll look at what we've covered from week 1 to week 4. So next week we are going to write an assessment relating to that. Um, if you are here to send me your email, please drop that in the chat section of this, so that I will communicate with you during the course of the week on the format in which you are going to be writing the test. Are you guys familiar with the use of Teams, MS Teams?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we used it already.
The reason is that I'm trying to look at the options. If we are to write the assessment on MS Team, or we should use my institution's module structure. I'm still trying to see if I can reach out to the ITS department to add you guys, to add your emails to the school system. If that is not possible, then we are going to write the assessment on MS Team. It's not going to be a very difficult assessment. It's going to be strictly based on what we have covered thus far, from week 1 to week 4, and it's going to be both subjective and objective questions. So it's something you should be able to play around, and it's just to test your brain and test your memory on most of what we have covered. Most of what we have covered thus far. And then we are going to be writing one essay. After this session, I'm going to give you the essay so that you can start working on it. And then you will submit the essay in January. Is that fine?
Yeah.
Yeah, you submit the essay in January, but I'll give you the essay question. Hopefully after this session, I'll give you the essay question you are going to be working on. And you can just do analysis as much as you can, and I will also give you the formats and everything you need to imbibe in doing the essay. So we'll talk about the essay hopefully after the end of this class. And I should also warn that today's class is likely going to be lengthy. I'm hopeful that we can finish in 90 minutes as planned. But if not, it may extend a little bit beyond the 90 minutes. But as much as possible, I will try and ensure I summarize most of what we'll be discussing. We may finish in an hour, but we may also extend beyond that. So please, I am, what do you call it now? I am preempting what may happen, and I'm already asking permission to possibly extend the class beyond the normal time we always have. So today we'll be discussing around the premises of theories in geopolitics. That's what we'll be discussing today, theories in geopolitics. And uh, at the end of the class, this is the class objective. I'm hoping that we should be able to, we should have accomplished at the end of the class. You should, at the end of this class, be able to understand roles that theory play in understanding international affairs. You know, last week we talked about levels of analysis, and we said we have the individual level, the systemic level, the global level, and the likes, and the state level. So this week we want to look at different theories. We'll explain what a theory is, and then we'll also explain how to use theories in understanding events that happen in the international system. And interestingly, we may not be looking at just events that happen in the international system alone. We also look at events that are happening around us. There are things that happen around you that you just see as normal. But I am hopeful that at the end of this session, you become critical thinkers, and you have critical perspective to everything that happens around you. And then you have to be familiar with the main theoretical frameworks in global politics and their opposing view. Apparently, we have two main theories in theoretical perspective in global politics, of which we'll be discussing today. And everything we discuss, in fact, everything that happened around you falls within these two basic theory. You can look at it from these two perspectives, which we'll be discussing. And then we look at other critical approaches to global politics that we can play around. So basically, these are the things in which we'll be looking at today, and then we see where we can extend the class to from there. So when we talk about theories, what is your own perception of theory? What is theory, if I may ask? What is theory? Any idea?
Can you repeat the question, please?
I said, what is theory? Theory.
In general, I can speculate on future events because of past experiences, and so I can, how should I say it? Maybe speculate what happens.
It's a way in which you can speculate on future events based on the past. Yes, that's one aspect of theory, and you are correct by that. Any other addition before we continue?
Something hypothetical that may or may not happen.
Hypothetical, something hypothetical that may or may not happen. So yeah, that's technical. That is correct in a way, but that's a little bit technical. So because when we say something hypothetical that may or may not happen, that is more or less hypothesis, and it is part of theory formation, though, right? That is an hypothesis. Because we say an hypothesis is something theoretical that may or may not happen, in the sense that you project a particular thing, and it's part of theory formation, in the sense that you have a perception, and then you come up with an hypothesis. You come up with a theoretical statement relating to a particular observation, and then if it happens, then you have validated what you have predicted. If it did not happen, then that becomes an invalidation of it. So we have in theory formation what we refer to as theory, antithesis, a critique of the theory. Then we have synthesis, and then we have theory. It's a cycle, but we'll get there. So first and foremost, we say, what is a theory? So when we discuss theory, we said they are abstract or generalized thinking. They are abstract or generalized thinking that seeks to explain or interpret or evaluate a particular thing, right? They are abstract, right? They are abstract thinking that seeks to explain, interpret, evaluate. You can also add predict, right? You can add predict to your explanation. We said theories are abstract thinking that seek to do four things. One, explain. Two, evaluate. Three, interpret. And then four, we can talk about prediction. So basically, these are the aspect of a theory that we can talk about, right? So we say theories are this. And then again, another definition to theory, we can say a theory is a lens. I don't have it here, but I'll just add it to I'm going to add it here quickly. We can say it is a lens. It is a lens to view the world, right? So we can say a theory is also a lens to view the world. It's a lens to view the world. If you are Raja is wearing glasses, I cannot see everybody, but at least I can see Raja, and I can see she's wearing glasses, right? So the assumption of a theory, we can use Raja's glasses as a theory, that you look from the glasses. As much as possible, you don't do like this and try to look outside your glasses, right? You look only from your glasses. So a theory is like a glass that you use to look at the world. And in your interpretation of a theory, you look at it strictly from that glass alone. So when you are wearing the glasses, right, you are not expected to look other ways. You cannot look this way, or at the top of the glass or below the glass. You need to look through the glass. So a theory is also a lens used to interpret the world, used to view the world, and it serves different purposes, right? And we said that different scopes and scales. It depends on what you are looking at. It can be broad, it can be specific, right? So I don't know why my stuff came out like this. But let me quickly try and fix it. Okay, so I'm trying to fix. I don't know why this came out this way. But let me see if I can find a way around it. Yeah? Okay, perfect. Okay, okay. Just to continue. So we said a theory is like a lens that's what we use to interpret the world, right? We used to view the world. That's what a theory is, right? And in the perception of the world as it is, within the premise of global politics too, we said there are theoretical approaches, ways in which we study politics, and it helps us identify the right question to ask. It also helps us identify how to go about asking those questions. So that's what the theory does. It helps us because now you have a way you evaluate, you interpret, you predict, and interpret a particular thing, a particular phenomenon. Theories helps us to also identify the right question to ask. When a particular thing happen around you, you need to know the right question to ask. You need to also know how to ask those questions, and then you also need to know how to go about answering them. So a question may be asked, there has to be an answer to that particular question. So basically, these are the premise in which theories operate. And then when we talk about these approaches, we have the explanatory theory, we have the interpretative theory, and we have the normative theory. So we have the explanatory theory, as the word implies, helps us to explain events. So when something happens in the world, of which we'll be using the theories in which we want to look at, when a particular thing happens, you when a theory is available to explain it, to explain the causal relationship. For instance, we may have a theory. I think I don't know if it was in this class. I used the sexist comment to say beautiful ladies are unintelligent, right? So when I see a lady that is unintelligent and she's beautiful, I can just assume that, okay, the theory of beautiful ladies helps to explain that beautiful ladies are unintelligent, right? So you see, that's a casual generalization, right? It's a casual generalization. It may be tested against hard evidence. So how do we test that against hard evidence? If we have a beautiful lady that is exceptionally intelligent, then we can say that that is a critique to that particular theory of the sexist theory we just came up with, to say beautiful ladies are unintelligent, right? Or we say people with so that's an example we can give. And then when we talk about interpretative theory helps to interpret a particular phenomenon, right? To give meaning to a particular phenomenon, to broaden our understanding of a particular situation that we find ourselves. So that's basically what an interpretative theory goes to do. And so in that place, we have the constitutive theory. It imposes meaning on a particular event. So when you look at a particular event, it imposes meaning on it to say, okay, in this particular thing that is happening, this is actually the reason why it's happening. It gives an interpretation to it. And then we have the normative theory. The normative theory is more or less a prescriptive theory, right? It tends to ask, it tends to give explanation or give analysis as relating to what ought to be. When you see a particular situation, how is it supposed to be? So basically, that's what a normative theory works on. For normative theories, it prescribes. You say, okay, this may be this way, but actually, this is how it should be, right? So it talks about what how events are supposed to be like. In most cases, normative theory are more or less idealistic in their approach. So when we talk about the theoretical landscapes in geopolitics, we have the mainstream politics, mainstream theories as the realist theory as well as the liberalist theory. So basically, these are the two mainstream theories in which you have realism and liberalism. Realism and liberalism. These are the two mainstream theories. And then, and like I said, every analysis in which you are going to be making in geopolitics, outside geopolitics, fits into this theory, realism and liberalism. And then another aspect of other theories are the critical perspective, right? And all the critical perspective has footshoots with the foundational theories of geopolitics, which is realism and liberalism. These are the foundational theories of geopolitics. They are the mainstream theories, and they are also referred to as the foundational theories. Every other theories develop its footshoots from this theory. So we have the critical perspective. We have Marxism, neo-Marxism, and the critical theory. You have social constructivism. You have post-structuralism. You have theories like feminism, green politics, post-colonialism, and many more theories that you can come up with. So basically, we are going to be looking at this, and as much as we can, and hope that time will permit us to treat them. Please, at any point in which you feel I am possibly too fast, or there is a point you want me to possibly re-explain, please do not hesitate to stop me at any point, and then we can talk about it. As much as possible, I want to make it as practical as it can be, right?
What
So
is the third one? Post-structuralism.
Yeah.
I can think of something about with the other points, but I can't think of something with point 3.
Of the post-structuralism. Okay, cool. We are going to get there now. Once we will discuss them as they flow, right? Is that okay? Okay. So let's start with the main theories, the foundational theories of geopolitics, which is realism and liberalism. So when we talk about realism, let me ask quickly. Any idea what realism is? Any idea what realism is? Any idea?
You see the world how it really is and don't have any dreams about changing it.
Okay. Yeah, that's correct. It's to see the world as it is from the premise of reality, right? Realism from the premise of reality, to see the world as it is, not necessarily about changing. But I'm going to delete the space of changing, right? For realists, they believe that it's just to see the world as it is, to see everything the way it is, and not try to play around what the world is. So for the realists, they said is to have a realistic view of the world, right? Have a realistic view of the world, no wishful thinking. When you see a chair is a chair, a table is a table, right? You cannot assume that a table is a chair, right? In as much as you cannot assume that the chair is a table. Yes, they may serve dual function, but you must not have wishful thinking about it. See the way it is. And what is this perception of seeing the world as it is? Before we go to the other bullet points there, the realists believe that human nature is intrinsically evil. That is what it is. We are all evil in our own sense. We are all selfish in our own sense. And that is what we are. You cannot change this thing. It's not the premise of being moral or being moralistic about your arguments. You must see the world as it is and look at it from a straight up eye. And when it comes to the premise of global politics, you must also see global politics the way it is, right? And in global politics, like we have analyzed in the discourse from week 1, we said politics is all about power and self-interest. There is nothing beyond that, right? We said really see the world as it is. So let's start with that. Seeing it, telling it the way it is realistically. And they believe that global politics is all about power and self-interest. And that's why this perspective is referred to as what? Power politics. The international system is all about power and self-interest. Now, going to the core assumptions of realism. They believe that people are essentially selfish and competitive. That's the premise of egoism. It is the nature of man to be selfish. So if somebody say you are selfish, the person is actually not, it's not a derogatory statement. If I refer to you as being selfish, it's not derogatory. It's just me telling you the truth, right? You are selfish. It's our nature to be selfish. Every man is selfish. Every human is selfish, right? And in the premises of this selfishness is every time I discuss this point, I always want to refer back to the discourse on love. Do you believe in love? Let me open up the discussion in this space. Do you believe in love? Does love exist?
Sure.
What are you saying, Marcel?
Sure.
You
I
believe
believe
in
that
love?
love exists. Yes.
Okay. Yes. Any other person, do you believe in love?
Yes.
Okay, Raja also believe in love. Who else?
Yes.
Do you have an opposing view? Can I assume that the whole class believes in love? If you don't believe in love, let me just indicate. Okay, silence is consent, right? So I assume the whole class believe in love. Okay, so what is love in the first place? What is love?
Chemicals.
How do you interpret love?
Chemicals in the brain.
Chemicals in the brain. Interesting. Okay. I want more opinion. Chemicals in the brain, yes. How else do we interpret love?
If you're not a romantical type, you can say love is a feeling which keeps two people together to raise children.
Okay, love is a feeling that keeps two people together to raise children. That's nice. I like that. Okay, one more.
Maybe love is about loving someone and receiving love.
Okay, loving someone and receiving love. Interesting. Okay, Ivan, Vincent, let me hear you. Ivan, Vincent, Tom, Linda, let's hear you. What is your own interpretation of love? Because the premise is that we all agree to the fact, or better still, you all agree, except for me, right? You all agree that you believe in love. So what is your own
I do believe in love, but I think it's a selfish motion because you claim something in a sense.
Okay, I like that, Ivan. Yes, Vincent, Linda, Tom.
I don't really have it or can word out what I think about love, but I just think it's there, and yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think love is care for someone else and love someone else and have feelings for someone else.
Okay, interesting. Tom, is Tom there?
Yeah, I'm here. I don't really have a strong opinion about it, I guess.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so let's continue. In the premise of realism, we say we established the fact that realism said we should look at it realistically, right? To see things the way they are. The truth is that there is nothing like love. Love in its true sense, or in the perception in which the world assumes love should be, does not exist. Love do not exist. That's the premise in which the realists come to say. That love is, like Ivan raised, selfishness. Love is, when you say you love somebody, what you are invariably meaning is that you love yourself. Love is actually about self. It's not about the other. Are we together? Are we together? Love is about self. It is selfishness. It is not selflessness. Love is not selfless. Love is selfish. In the ground that you are just a collateral beneficiary of someone else's selfishness. If you believe in the fact that you are the collateral beneficiary of someone else's selfishness, then we say love exists. But in the true sense of the word, there is nothing like love. Love do not exist in its true sense. Because now, like Marcel just said now, that it is two people coming together to make babies. Now, that is two people, two selfish people that their interest aligns. So when your interest aligns with my interest, then I say, I love you. Then you say, you do what? You love me. So what we are invariably saying is that I am selfish, I love me, and you love you. What you do is that you love the feeling you get when you are with me, right? Not necessarily because I love the feeling you get when you are with me. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Does it make sense? So you see, in the true sense of it, the love does not exist. Love itself is selfishness, right? Because it is the feeling you get, not the feeling that other person gets. So that is why immediately, at any point in a relationship, for instance, once you realize that you are not benefiting from that relationship, what do you do? What do you do?
Yeah.
Once the relationship is no longer to your interest, what do you do?
I leave, break up.
What do? You leave, you break up. So you see, it goes back to that space that the true sense is that it is not about the person. So when somebody tells you, I love you, you know better now. You know the fact that no, you don't love me, you love yourself. You only love the feeling you get when you are with me. And basically that's what it is. And then if you move that even further, away from the premise of relationship, what is the relationship between a mother and a child? Do you think that a mother loves her child or a parent love their children? Do you think they love their children based on this analysis we just gave now? Do you think love exists within the space of a parent and a child?
I hope so.
You hope so. I need you to be critical about it now. Do you think love exists in that space?
When we go with what you told us, parents love their children in a way so that their children can take care of them when they are older.
Yeah, that's a point. They do that so that the children can take care of them when they are older. That's one. Sometimes they are doing that because they enjoy the feeling they get by doing that. It's not about the children. If they don't do that, they don't feel nice. So you see, a father will not take care a father or a mother takes care of of their kids because of the feeling they get. It's all about them. At the inner of every action, that's what we are saying, that in every action and inaction of man, there is an innate, it's like onions, right? It's always hidden in the layers of many layers. When you keep peeling, you will not realize that there's a self in it. That's why when you want to express your love to somebody, you say, I love you, right? It's an I thing. It's all about you, right? Even when people try to do things that are referred to as selfless service. Selfless service itself is not selfless. That's what we mean in realism, that there's no selfless service. What we have is selfish service. Are you getting me? Because it is the feeling you get. There is always something, there's always something, there's always an agenda, right? So with realism, we believe that there is always an agenda in every action of man. Are we together? And the way there's always an agenda in every, and the point is that it is not a bad thing. So let's establish that. It is not bad, it is not wrong for you to have an agenda. Are you getting me? It is not wrong. It is our normal human nature. Every human always protect his interests, right? In fact, even if you are religious, and you may want to use the example of let's say Jesus Christ, for instance. I'm sorry for those people that are Christian. I'm also a Christian, so I'm fine to use this example, right? We say Jesus Christ died for the world. Even if you want to die for somebody, you realize that you are doing that because of the feeling you will get from dying for the person. Your last feeling before you go to the world beyond. You get the idea? So there's no selflessness. You are doing that for something, right? So basically, that's the argument we make when we discuss this. So what we bring out of this is to say that the human nature is selfish, right? The human nature is selfish, and because of our selfishness, everybody wants to protect his own interests. If all of us in this class attempt to protect our interests, what we are going to be having is a situation of competition, right? We become competitive. So it is also a natural instinct that we are competitive. Every human is competitive, right? So we are selfish and we are also competitive. And now the realists argue to say that within global politics, the state is also like the human. The nature of the state, the nature of humans, the state adopts the nature of humans. So the state is also naturally competitive and the state is also naturally selfish. So there's no state that does any action out of free will, right? So every action has an agenda. Every action has a self-interest that comes to it. And the self-interest of states are referred to as what? Their national interest, right? Their survivor. Every state moves towards survivor, their personal survivor. So that's the argument of the realist. So the second argument of the realist as relating to global politics is to talk about the anarchic nature of the international system, right? The anarchic nature of the international system. I think last week, I don't know, I explained the premise of anarchy when we discuss. I don't know if it's last week or 2 weeks before now. When we discuss states, we said each state in the international system is sovereign, is independent of its own, right? And every state can decide its affairs within the international system. And we said that in the international system, there's no global government and there's no global police. Because there's no global government and there's no global policing system in the international system, we said the international system is anarchic, right? It's anarchic. So that's the argument of the realists. They say because there's no global government, there's no leader, then the international system is chaotic. It's chaotic. So that chaotic nature of the international system is also referred to as what? As anarchy. And I suppose you understand the premise of a space being chaotic. Where there's lawlessness, where there's no law, there's no order, then anarchy will rule, right? And in the space of anarchy, what becomes the currency in an anarchic state is power. Who is most powerful determine what happens in the system. If you are the one that is most powerful, you'll be the one to call the shots. If you are the one that if it's economy power we are looking at, who has the money decide what we buy. If the whole class, for instance, I think I've used this example before when we talk about say the pie or something. If the whole class go for a dinner, right? Who is paying will determine what will we eat, right? Am I correct by saying that? Whoever is paying will determine what we eat. So we assume that who is paying is the owner of power at that particular space, right? So that is how the international system operates. So the international system operates an anarchic nature, and that anarchy is all about power struggle. So within the international system, the selfish nature of the international system combined with the anarchic nature of the international system lead to what we refer to as what? Power politics. Are we together on that? So basically that's the argument of the realists, right? That's the argument of the realists. And then talking about the ego of the state ego, the realists believe that they have a pessimistic view of the human nature. They believe that the human nature cannot change, right? I suppose you are familiar, I don't know if you are familiar with the saying, a leopard cannot change his skin, right? That is how the realists assume the human nature is. You cannot change. All of us are selfish, and we cannot stop being selfish. It is just our nature. Right? A dog is a dog, a pig is a pig, a leopard is a leopard, a lion is a lion. You cannot domesticate a lion. A lion cannot become a vegetarian, right? That is the argument of the realists. You cannot make a lion to become a vegetarian, in as much as you cannot make a sheep a carnivorous animal. A sheep will not eat, will not be carnivorous, right? Or better still, I think the best example is to use the lion, right? You cannot make a lion a vegetarian. A leopard cannot change his skin. And that's the argument. So human nature will continuously be human nature. You cannot change human nature, right? And in as much as you cannot change human nature, you also cannot change the states. The states will always be what they are. No matter what happens, the states will always be that space. So, and then we talk about the premise of state of nature. State of nature is the premise of anarchy that I just explained. Thomas Hobbes discussed the argument on the state of nature. He said before the emergence of a state, the state was in what was referred to as a state of nature. And in the state of nature, life was short, life was brutish, and life was poor. What does it imply by the state of nature is what we explained when we discussed anarchy, where there was no law and order. Everybody, it was a situation of power became might. And I just explained that I just explained what we imply by power is might. The most powerful person determines what happens in the society, determines what happens in the community. And I just gave example using our class. If we go for a dinner date, who is paying the money, who has the money will determine what we eat. So even if for instance, who is paying the money is a vegetarian, and some of us like meat. For instance, myself, I love eating meat. And then if you give me vegetarian meal now, maybe we're going to be having a challenge. But because I'm not the one paying, I have to eat whatever you provide. I have to eat what you are eating because you are the vegetarian and you insist that we are all going to eat vegetarian meals. What happens? We eat vegetarian meals. So you see, power becomes might. And that's what is in operation in the state of nature. Power becomes might, right? And the international system is also within that space of the state of nature. And in the state of nature, Thomas Hobbes argued that people came together and established a contract and say, okay, you know what, let us come up with some rules and regulation, and let us hand over some of our rights to the states, so that the states can protect us in our society, in the society. And then that was the emergence of a state. So that is why we have what we refer to as rights and responsibility. You have rights that you expect the state to do for you based on social contracts, and then you also have responsibility. The state expects some responsibility from you, like paying your taxes, like abiding to rules and regulation and the likes. And then you also expect the state to also provide some things for you, which are your rights as citizens. So you see, these rights and responsibilities, what we refer to as the social contract. The social contract. That's a contract between the states and the people. All right. So the contract between the state and the people is referred to as what? The social contracts. So that is how the system operates. And within the international system, it also operates within this space. And another thing in the state of nature is the premise of survival. Everybody is fighting for his or her own survival. Everybody wants to stay alive. So for that reason, self-interest is the order of this day. And if you relate this now to the international system is anarchic. It is all about power politics, right? And it's also all about survival, which is what? National interest. So basically, this is what happens. And because it's based on this, it is also prone to competition. So please take note of these 4 points. The realists believe that the international system is anarchic. They believe that the states are the most important actor within the international system. The state is, in fact, the only actor in the international system. So 1, the international system is anarchic. 2, the state are the most important actor in the international system. 3, the international system is based on survival, state egoism, and then finally, conflict is inherent in the international system. I think it would be nice to raise this point. I just itemize now. So basically, that's the idea. So 1, we said the international system what else did I raise? State operate on national interest. Okay, and then okay. So this is the realist assumption in the international system. This is the assumption in the international system. So they said the international system is anarchic. I think we should itemize this just for control. We should itemize this for control. So they said the international system is anarchic. So the international system is anarchic. It's state are the most important actors. State operates on self-interest, which is referred to as national interest, and then competition is inherent. So this is the realist perception of the international system. Okay. So this is a question for you to think about. So why does anarchy tend towards conflicts, tension and conflict, and then possibly war? Why does anarchy tend towards tension, conflict, and possible war? For the sake of time, I'm not going to dwell on this. It should have been a discussion for us, but for time, I will just continue. So why does it happen that way? I've explained that based on those 4 points. States are egocentric in their self. It is based on self-interest and survival. Secondly, it's also based on what we refer to as security dilemma. The relationship between states are always characterized by suspicion and uncertainty. What do we imply by that? By the security, the situation between states, the relationship between states are characterized by suspicion and uncertainty. Because every state will pursue its own interests. We have established the fact that every state is selfish in its own right. So nobody is doing anything for free. Nobody is doing it out of an altruistic motive. So there is mutual suspicion between states. And this mutual suspicion can lead to the premises of competition. And this competition eventually will lead to conflict and war. And then states do not mind going to war as they contend with even marginal gains, the premise of relative gains, right? They don't mind going to war if they are going to have a comparative advantage, no matter how little it is, to to another state. So for that reason, they will not mind going to war. So these are some of the reasons why tension and conflict becomes an issue within the international system. So they don't mind. They will go to war for marginal gains and all that. And all that. Why relative gain, we said it reduces cooperation. So these are some of the reasons why they go to war. And then we'll talk about conflicts and the premise of the balance of power. I think we've explained the premise of balance of power, right? I will discuss the issue of polarity. And these are some of the things that because of power politics within the international system, we have this situation. The premise of the need to continuously balance power within the international system. And the continuous need to balance power leads to the premise of polarity, the bipolar system, the multipolar system, the unipolar system, and the likes. And the argument is that the bipolar system has greater stability than a multipolar system. And I think we established this when we discussed the polar system in our last two classes. So these are the key themes when we discuss realism. Competition and selfishness is the human nature. States are egocentric and conflict prone. Statecraft and national interest. States are always about their national interest. International anarchy is the order of the day, and it has implication. And then polarity, stability, and then the balance of power. So basically, these are the arguments. These are the main themes when we discuss the realist perception of international politics. And then we move to the liberalist perception, the liberalist perception of international politics. Liberalism also implies idealism, right? So this is the liberalist perception. This is the opposing view, the other foundation, right, of international policy. We say there are two, realism and liberalism. So under liberalism, it talks more or less about the notion of harmony and the balance of interests within the international system. They talk about harmony and the balance of interest within the international system. They recognize the fact that conflicts can happen, but they say conflict is never irreconcilable. We can always resolve conflicts, right? There's a possibility for us to resolve conflicts, and there's a possibility for peace and cooperation within the international system. Why the realists argue that competition is inherent, conflict is inherent within the international system, the liberalists argue that conflict is not necessarily inherent. We can actually have cooperation within the international system, and cooperation will lead to less conflict within the international system. The liberalists have some views that are in support of the realists, but they have where they now move away as a standpoint position in the argument. So in liberalism, we have what we refer to as the interdependence liberalism. Basically, we have three types of liberalism. So we have the interdependence liberalism, we have the Republican liberalism, and then we have the liberal institutionalism. So basically, these are the three in which you should be familiar with: interdependence liberalism, Republican liberalism, and liberal institutionalism. So let's pick up on these three and see where it takes us. So when we talk about the assumptions of liberalism, so first they believe in the notion of harmony, like we have stated, and they believe that there can be harmony among competing interests. They agree to the fact that human nature is intrinsically selfish, but they also argue that away from our selfishness, humans have the ability to rise above their selfishness and also think about collective interests. So it is not always that we think about individual interests as humans, we also have collective interests. So that's the argument in which they come up with this. Yes, we agree that there is selfish notion of man, but man can rise above his selfishness and cooperate within themselves. So that's one fundamental position in which they stood by. And then they also argue that yes, competition is also visible within the international system. Competition will always happen because there's selfish nature. People will compete, but competition can also lead to cooperation. We can also cooperate. We don't necessarily have to be competitive, continuously be competitive. There are periods in which we become cooperative within our system, within the international system. So they believe that yes, and within this space too, they too believe that the human nature can also flow to the state nature, right? Rarely say we are competitive, we are selfish. The state is competitive and the state is also selfish. The liberals argue that the states can be cooperative and they can also rise above their selfishness. And so basically these are the arguments in which they make. And then they also say the international system can always remain decentralized. Yes, we don't actually need a government, but we can work together. We can work together within this space, right? We can work together. We can have rules and regulations that we all abide by. So in as much as we don't have an international government or international policing system, quote and unquote, we have rules and regulations that we can abide by. So interdependence liberalism, this is the position of the interdependence liberalism. From the premise of interdependence, we can relate together within the premise of interdependence, and they are grounded in the ideas about trade and economic relations. The argument here is that no man is an island. No man can operate on his own. And that is why Aristotle said that humans are political animals. They say humans are political animals. The sense is that we are social beings. You cannot stay in isolation. If you stay in isolation, you will go nuts. You will go nuts. I suppose in the period of lockdowns with the COVID situation we had, we had a large case of depression in the space of the lockdown within the early days of COVID-19. A large issue of depression. We had large issues of abuse, domestic abuse, and the likes. Because naturally we are social beings. We help ourselves one way or the other. Even if we are not talking, even if we are not in talking terms, the fact that I go out and I see you, I can move around and all those things. So within this space, that's the natural human nature. Human nature is interdependent in a space. So that's the argument of the liberalists, to say that we are interdependent, we cannot live on our own, we cannot survive on our own. So no state can survive on its own. While a particular state may have the resources, the natural and human resources, another states may have the technological resources. So you may have the resources, but if you don't have the technological capacity to utilize what you have, then what you have is useless, right? So you need another partner to be able to use what you have, right? So we talk about what? Interdependence. We talk about trade and economic relation. The major proponent of this is David Ricardo. David Ricardo was a major proponent when it comes to interdependence liberalism. And that's where we came about the commercial liberalism, when we talk about the need for trade around the world. So, and then they believe in the virtue of free trade. Because we are interdependent, because states need to operate within the premise of working together, then we need to open up our borders. You cannot confine your borders. You cannot close up your borders to other states. There is a need for free trade. There's a need for goods to move in and out of territories freely. So that's the argument in which we make on this ground. And the states, like I said, are sufficiently interdependent. I think I've explained that you cannot stay on your own. So for that reason, we need to work together. So And then, so basically that's what we discuss when we discuss these arguments. And then the premise of complex interdependence. What happens in other countries affects every other person, right? I suppose we can all relate to the premise of complex interdependence, right? COVID, for instance, started in China, in Wuhan, China. In less than weeks, it is affecting people all around the world. It has affected Europe, it affected Africa, it affected Asia, it affected Australia, North America, and South America, and the likes. So you see, that's complex interdependence. What is happening here having effects on what is happening in other space. And then we talk about globalization and the likes. We are going to discuss globalization, I suppose, in our next lecture. You understand that better. And then again, when we started this class, we were all concerned about the American politics, the elections in America. Why are we all concerned? Remember, we raised that because what happened in America has a direct and indirect effect on what happened in our various localities. So what is happening in our spaces? And then you talk about issue of climate change, for instance. You talk about issue of climate change. Emission of greenhouse gases in a particular locality has an effect on other localities. We talk about highland nations and the likes. The increase in global temperature and all that. So that talks about the premise of complex interdependence and all that. So this is the argument on interdependence liberalism. And then the second aspect of liberalism is what we refer to as what? Republican liberalism. The premise of republic, right? Republic. And in this space, we're talking about the external behavior of a state having influence on its political and constitutional makeup, right? It's the premise of inside-out theory. What we imply by that is that the characteristics of that state determines its behavior. Remember, we discussed that last week when we discussed state level of analysis, the state level of analysis, talking about the innate characteristics of that particular state having effect on its behavior within the international system. And that is what the Republican liberalism talks about. Talks about the constitution of the state. Is the state a democratic state? Remember, we talked about the democratic peace theory, right? Last week. What is the nature of the state? What is the government of the state? What is the political culture in that state? Are they passive? Are they active? Is it a passive political culture? Is it an active political culture? Is it an authoritarian state? Is it a democratic state? Is it a monarchical system? What system of government is in operation in that space? So these are some of the things in which you look at when we talk about Republican liberalism. And then this can be traced to Wilson Woodward and Kent. And we talk about democratic states are naturally peaceful. I think we've discussed the democratic peace theory and all that. So the last aspect of liberalism is the liberal institutionalism. Liberal institutionalism. Here, the chief external mechanism to constrain state behavior is what? International organization. That's the argument of the liberal institutionalism, that they said the only way to control state behavior is to have international organization like the United Nations, right? That the only way we can control state behavior is to have international organizations that every state is a member. So the rules and regulation in the international organization determines how the state will operate. So that's what liberal institutionalism talk about. There's a need to set up structure within the international system, and this structure should be international organizations. And this organization can now control state behavior because each organization will have what? Rules and regulations. For example, you have the United Nations, and before the United Nations, you have the League of Nations, right? And the defunct, that was after the First World War. We had the League of Nations after the First World War. When we discuss international organization, we talk more about that. And the essence of the League of Nations was to ensure international peace and stability within the world. It broke down at the beginning of the Second World War. And after the Second World War in 1945, we had the United Nations. And the United Nations has been able to stand by this objective. of ensuring peace and stability in the world, right? So they said for us to have to control the behavior of the state, then we must have a strong institution that all states must be party to. We must have international law, right? We must have international law. And then in liberal institutionalism, they believe in what we refer to as collective security. That's why we start talking about the issue about, like, for example, organization like NATO, right? That talks about the security of the NATO nations, right? So talks about collective security and the respect for international law. What do we imply by collective security? The security of one is the security of all for one and one for all, right? So anything that affects one state affects the entirety of the members in the collective security, right? So that's what we discuss under the liberal institutionalism. So for the liberal institutionalism, states are more concerned about absolute gain rather than relative gain, right? We are concerned about the gain of all rather than the gain of one person within the international system. So let's work on the gain, let everybody benefit rather than allowing just one person benefits. That's the argument under liberalism. While realists argue that states are all more concerned about relative gain than they are concerned about absolute gain. So they prefer for the state to gain than for the entirety of the state to gain. So basically, these are the arguments in liberalism. So please get this. In liberalism, I think I will write that again as summative because I will be sending this slide to you after the end of the class. So it would be nice to add this. Liberalists, they call liberalist assumption. Let's ask the call liberalist assumption, right? So one they said competition, cooperation. They talk about cooperation, right? Cooperation, and then the fact that the international system they talk about international system, and then they talk about a piece of collective security. So basically these are the premises of the liberalists. These are liberalist assumptions of around the international system. They did not argue necessarily against the fact that humans are naturally selfish, but they said that in our selfishness we can still cooperate, and there's a need for international law and then international security. Collective security is a possibility within the international system. So now let's quickly look at other critical perspective in the international system. Most of these critical perspectives are post-positivists, right? And in most cases, the critical perspective seeks to challenge the status quo. They seek to speak away from the normal. The status quo is the view of the liberalist and the realist. They tend to move away from that and align themselves more or less with the exploited class within the international system. So the critical perspective, like we said, we have the Marxism, neo-Marxism, and the critical theory. We have the social constructivism, post-structuralism, feminism, green politics, and we have post-colonialism. And I think I think we are still within the space of time, and we'll see as much as we can cover in the next 30 minutes. So when we talk about the critical perspective, starting from the premise of Marxism, Marxism is, I suppose you should be familiar with the discourse of Marxism. And and from classical Marxism down to the new perception, that's neo Marxism. So what exactly is Marxism all about? Marxism talks about, is based on the materialistic conception of history. Materialistic conception of history. And what do we imply by that? Karl Marx, as the proponent, the major proponent of Marxism, argued that the human system, the human society is based on a class system. And I think I need to add that here, right? It's let me add that here. I'll just be adding and then I'll be discussing that. Class struggle. Okay, let's start with materialistic conception of history. And they talk about materialistic conception of history, and then they talk about the premise of class struggle. So we'll discuss this. So what is the premise of the materialistic conception of history under Marxism? The argument is to say that the human society is all about property and property ownership. That is in simple terms. The human society is all about property and property ownership. And the society historically has been structured in the premise of this, property and property ownership. And that links to the arguments around class struggle. They argue to say that historically, we have two classes of people within a society. We have the haves and haves versus the have-nots. We have what we refer to the haves and the have-nots. Starting from the space, going back, we said the human society is what? Materialistic conception of the society. And the argument of materialistic conception of the society is to say that it is based on property ownership. And they said that in the society, we have two classes of people, those that have property and those that do not have property. That is how the society is structured historically. And Marx argued to say that those that have property will continuously oppress those that do not have property. I'm starting on a layman's premises just to give a background to what Marxism is all about. So they said, what is materialistic? Now we have those that have property and those that do not have property. Those that have property will always oppress those that do not have property. So historically, we start with the space of the argument around slaves and slaves owners. So the slave owners were those that have property, and then the slaves were the property themselves. So they were without property. So the society was in that space, and there was class competition. There was class struggle. There was a struggle between the slaves and the slave owner for emancipation, right? And then the slaves liberated themselves. And then the society moved from the premise of categorizing the society as slaves and the slaves owner, the free men and the slave. And then we moved to where we have what was referred to as feudalism, right? Under the premises of feudalism, it talks about land ownership, right? So you see, it goes back to property ownership this time. But the property ownership this time was land. The first was slave. Slave was the property. Now we move to the premise of land. Land became the property. So you have people that have land and those that do not have land. Those that have land were referred to as the feudal lords. And then those that do not have land were referred to as the serfs, right? And then the system moved from there. There was a struggle between those that have land and those that do not have land. That's the feudal lords and the serfs. And then that competition between the feudal lords and the serfs led to another system of operation within the society. Now we have what we refer to as the capitalist system. In the capitalist system, it was based on capitals. It was based on capital, right? Now it became an individualistic ownership of property, and the community operates, the society operates on an individualistic sense, whereby what you have is yours, what I have is mine. So you see, in that space, capital became the property. It became the material to determine the society. So in the space of capitalism, we have the bourgeoisies. and then we have the protectorates. In that space, again, we talk about the bourgeoisie, the capitalists, as the owners of property, the haves. And then you have the have-nots as the protectorate, who are perpetually serving the capitalists. So you see, in that space too, you still have the haves and the have-nots. And Marx projected, based on this history, that the world will move to a situation whereby you have a socialist system. In the socialist system, we're talking about a system whereby the states, the people become the owners of property. The state become the owners of property. Most means of production and distribution becomes at the jurisdiction of the states. And it's argued that, yes, at that place, we still have individualistic elements, but the state will own most of the property in the society. But Marx also argued to say that we move from there to a communist society, whereby everything will now be totally owned by the state. So you see, that is materialistic conception of the state, a materialistic conception of the society based on property ownership. And one thing you need to understand in this space is that there will always be haves and there will always be have-nots. There will always be the oppressed and there will always be the oppressors. The oppressed are those that do not have the property. The oppressor are what? Those that have those property. So that is a simplistic view of the Marxist notion. So the Marxists align themselves with the oppressed, right? So Marxism aligns itself, they support the oppressed to say, okay, the oppressed needs to be supported, right? And they believe that the system that we operate is based on the notion it's based on the caprices, the will of the oppressed, the haves. So the have will perpetually put the have-nots in perpetual oppression. So there are quite a lot of arguments in which you will come up when we discuss this. And there's a lot of stuff you will look at. For instance, when you look at celebrations, how many of you now we're talking about different celebrations that happen in the world, right? Festive seasons. You have Christmas. Christmas is in a few days' time, right? You have New Year celebration. We have what other celebrations do you have? What other celebrations do you have in your space there? Right? Give me some examples of celebration in which you celebrate. People have to spend. Give me an example.
Birthdays, Christmas.
Birthdays, Christmas, Valentine, and all these celebrations, right? Do you agree that these celebrations are necessary within the system? We're supposed to be having this celebration, right?
Yeah, I think.
Okay. How many of us are in agreement that these celebrations are necessary? We are supposed to be having them. It's a good thing for us to be having celebration. Christmas, New Year, and the likes. Valentine.
I think some celebrations are necessary, but some are just money makers.
That is the idea. I like what you just said now. Some are money make. You just spend money. Marx, the Marxist notion when it comes to the celebration is that all these things you see are the idea of those people that haves, the haves in the society. Celebration are the notion of the haves. And what do? It is the agenda of the haves to keep the have-nots in perpetual poverty. Celebration, all the celebration, you see, when you celebrate, what do? You spend, right? You need to spend what you have gathered. So you imagine a situation whereby you have gathered money for the whole of the year, right? And now, during that celebration, what do? You need to give back that money. So you see, the capitalists want to keep us in perpetual poverty, want to keep the oppressed in the society in perpetual poverty. And if you continuously amass capital over time, you will become a capitalist. But because they don't want you to move away to become a capitalist, they ensure they keep you in perpetual poverty. So that way, you return back to the system. You return back to the system, and a way to ensure that you continuously return back to the system is to arrange celebrations, different kind of events at different time interval. So that at different time interval, what do? You return back to the system. So you will gather your money from January to December. And then in December, you squander the entirety of your money in a day. In one day, in a bid to celebrate Christmas, you squander your money. Then you go back to what? You go back to January, and then you start gathering again. You start gathering again. You gather and gather and gather and gather, and then you get to that particular event, then you squander the entirety of your capital, right? Then you start again. That way, you will never become a capitalist. You get the idea? So you see, these are notions, these are premises in the capitalists will argue. Sorry, the Marxists will argue that these celebrations are a way to return us. It is a rat race, right? It's a rat race. It's a cycle. You gather, you spend, you become poor again, then you gather, then you spend, then you become poor, then you gather again, then you spend, then you become poor. You see? Perpetual poverty, right? That's one argument in which the Marxists made. And then they also argue to say that the state is an instrument of oppression. You know, the liberalists say that the state is an instrument that was needed in the society to ensure law and order. Whose law and order do we need? Why do we have law and order? Why shouldn't we just destroy everything, right? So you see, the state is there to ensure law and order, but whose interest is that law and order? Have you thought about it before? Of whose interest is law and order?
The people in power?
People in power. It is their interest. It's not the interest of, if for instance, we are saying that we need police to ensure the safety of property. If you don't have property, why do you need police? You get the idea? So you see, so the Marx argue that the state is an instrument of oppression, and the state is an instrument that was devised by the elites. The elites in the society, who are the haves, devised the state, all to oppress the masses, who are what? They have not. So basically that's the argument in which they made. And they also argue, they continue to argue that capitalism contains contradiction that will lead to its end. So they argue that capitalism will end over time because there's an argument around Marxism. I'm trying to remember now. They said it will get to a time whereby the poor will have nothing to eat but the elites. The masses will have nothing to eat but the elites. So it will get to a time that the masses will become tired. When they get tired of the system, then they will destroy the system. They will destroy capitalism. So capitalism was on self-destruct. Are we together? So they believe that capitalism is on self-destruct because the masses will eventually destroy capitalism. So once they destroy capitalism, then they will raise a socialist society. And then over time, it will become a communist society. So basically, these are some of the arguments in which the Marxist theory argue. So on the premise of social constructivism is from it's just as the word implies, constructivism, constructing, to construct, to make. I suppose last week or so, I talked about the premise of tabula rasa, right? Tabula rasa, right? To say that a child is born blank. The society in which the child is born determine what the child becomes at the end of the day. And it's interesting that when you read up about this, they've carried out a whole lot of social experiments to determine if the DNA of a child determines what the child becomes, or the society of the child determines what the child becomes. There's a lot of experiments that they've carried out on this longitudinal experiments relating to that. Though it's not ethical, but yeah, there are experiments that have been carried out on that ground. But that's not the concern of this class. The concern of this class is just to look at the theory of social constructivism and use it to interpret events. So it's based on the belief that there's no objective reality. There's no objective reality. What you know as true is based on your understanding of it. For instance, if I ask you, what you call black may not necessarily be black. What you call white may not necessarily be white. What you call whatever color, your color may not necessarily be what it is. What you see as right and what you see as wrong may not necessarily be what it is. You get it? So your perception of reality is clouded. Your perception of reality is clouded by a whole lot of factors. So there is no objective reality. Reality is relative. For instance, you may be in a space whereby what you see as right may be what I see as wrong. For instance, in Africa, or in some part of Africa, for instance, where I'm from, when you want to greet somebody that is older than you, it is expected that you cannot tell somebody older than you, how are you? You get that? It's seen as disrespectful. It is somebody that's older than you that is supposed to tell you, how are you, in greeting, right? So you see, if I go to a space, if I go to my locality now, I cannot tell my father, I cannot greet my father and say, how are you? That's disrespectful. But in your locality, how are you is normal, right? So you see, within my space now, it's disrespectful to do that. But within your space, it's not disrespectful. So you see, that's relative, right? In my space, for instance, I cannot extend my hand to shake somebody older than me. So when I'm greeting, I should not be the first to raise up my hands in greeting, right? It's expected that the person that is older is supposed to be the one to first extend his hand to shake me, right? So you see, that's the terms of what is right and wrong, right? So again, another example I may give now, which in your space is not the same. Another example is in some locality, in some perception, for instance, it is wrong for a lady to wear a jean, a trouser. A lady is not supposed to wear trousers. It's not to wear trousers. Why in another locality, that is seen as normal. It is right? And then if you go to, say, Scotland, for instance, a man who wears a skirt. In my locality, if you wear a skirt, you are seen as abnormal. You get the idea? So that is the idea we're giving, to say that reality itself is relative. It's relative on where you are. So what you see as right may not be right. So you cannot say that there's no absolute reality. That's what we are trying to say. There's no absolute reality. Reality is relative. Reality is based on interpretation. You can interpret it. That's what we are saying. So you construct what reality. Reality is constructed. It's constructed based on our experience, based on it goes back to the premise of tabula rasa, right? Reality is constructed based on our experience. So what we see the world as is based on our experience. For instance, if you have been involved in a rape, if you have been raped before, either as a man or a woman, if you have been raped before, your perception about that is different from somebody that's not been raped before, right? So you see, that is based on your experience. Your notion on that becomes your experience. And so that's the argument in this space. So anarchy is what a state makes of it. That's what it implies, because it depends on the experience of that state, right? And then in this space, the critique to this theory is that it is difficult to conduct empirical research to validate any particular thing. It's difficult for you to, because everything is relative. So it's very difficult for you to conduct empirical research on that, because you cannot come up with objective reality. We cannot come up with objective truth, right? And even in the international system too, because we are relating with different states, with different people. So it's very difficult for us to come up with an objective view of what anarchy is, or an objective view of what the law is. And that is why, from this theory, you'll be able to understand why it has been difficult, or why it is difficult for the world to come up with objective law and order, right? For us to come up with objective agreements. Because when you are looking at it from this side, I am looking at it from a different space. So that's the argument under the critical social constructivism, right? So the next is to look at it from post-structuralism. Post-structuralism. So the idea of post-structuralism talks about the premises of language. Ideas are conveyed in language, which in itself is what? Is complex. It depends on what? Complex power relations, right? Ideas are conveyed in language. Now we are speaking, the mode of communication is what? Is English. Ideas are conveyed in this space. And language itself is all about a complex, it's based on complex power relation. The link between power and system are discussed within this space. We say, you know, when we talk about the premise to say that knowledge is power, right? Knowledge is power. I suppose you've heard that before. Knowledge is power. So it implies that knowledge and power are the same. So when you have power, you have knowledge. When you have knowledge, you have power. And this knowledge, these ideas are transferred on the premises of that particular knowledge, that particular knowledge in which you have. And that knowledge is transferred based on language. And within the international system, that the language of the world is determined by what? Power relation, right? English, for instance, become the lingua franca in most countries of the world because the British colonized the world at the point, right? The British colonized the entirety of, they colonized a large portion of the world. And for that reason, English became the lingua franca in most countries of the world. And that's why you see, I suppose you guys can relate with that. And I have this notion, I don't know how true it is. Maybe you can clear me on that. To say what's it called now? A typical German, even if he understands, he knows how to speak, he or she knows how to speak English, we hardly make communication in English. Why? Have you thought about it? Sometimes you think it's just cultural. That yes, you can speak in English, but if I come to Germany and I speak English to you, you will, even if you understand what I'm saying in English, you will not respond in English. You want to respond in German. And the same thing goes for French, right? Even if they understand what you are saying, they will want to speak in French. Why do you think that is the order of the day, right? Have you thought about it before? It talks about the premise of power relation, right? Because you are asking yourself, why should I speak the language of the other when I feel I am stronger? You get the idea? So you see, we play around these premises of power relations when it comes to the premise of power too, when it comes to the premise of language. So these ideas are conveyed in language, and language becomes complex. Language itself is an instrument of domination. Language becomes an instrument of domination, right? And it flows, it continues on this place, right? And political events are interpreted based on what you know. They are interpreted based on your knowledge, and they are interpreted based on this language as it is. So again, another critique to that is that it is relative. It engages based on what? Relativity, because language are different. What you speak is different. What I speak and what you speak is also different. So that itself becomes a challenge within the international system. So the next point is to look at feminism. Feminism is becoming a popular theory, a popular perspective in the international system and in the world itself. And the summary of that is to challenge male dominance, to challenge the patriarchal nature of the international system, to challenge the patriarchal nature of the international system, to challenge the exclusion of women on critical issues within the society. And that flows from the society also to the international system. So the idea here is to challenge the notion of male dominance. And I suppose that we are familiar with when we continue saying that is a man's world. It's a man's world and all that. So we are saying that it's no longer a man's world. It's a man as well as a woman's as well as a woman's world. So when it comes to that, so these are the arguments in which you make around this space, and it flows even into the international system to discuss issues around feminism. The next is the green politics. Green politics has to do with the premise of nature, right? Concern about the environment, and it's also referred to as ecologism, right? They concern about the human environment. The safety of environment. They concern about the environment itself. And in green politics, we argue that the activities of man is affecting the natural environment. And if the activity of man is not curtailed, it's going to lead to the extinction of man, the extinction of mankind in itself. A perfect example is the issue of climate change. For instance, the continuous emission of greenhouse gases will lead to the increase in the temperature of the world, and that will lead to climate change, and that will lead to the extinction of man over time. So the arguments around nature, right? The link between the humankind and nature is the whole argument around the green politics, right? So these are some of the stuff in which we look at here. And then when we talk about post-colonialism, this is another perspective within the international system. And this what it tried to expose the cultural dimension of colonial rule by establishing the legacy of the ideas that comes from outside the West. Because like I said, everything is all about power and power relation. And the argument that the Western ideas are the ultimate ideas. So under post-colonialism, we're talking about the fact that ideas that outside the West are also supposed to start seeing the light of the day. We need to start discussing ideas that are not necessarily Western in orientation. So these are some of the stuff in which we discuss when we discuss and this. And then the premise of globalization, thinking globally, and in this space, you talk about the idea of globalization, the complex interrelation of the world. Like we said, what happens in one space affects what happens in another space. And in this place, we are going to be talking about the three problems when it comes to globalization. So globalization has brought about three theoretical challenges, three empirical problems. We talk about empirical in the sense of how to make sense of the world in which everything now affects everything else, right? How do we make sense of the world where everything has an effect on everything? And then how do we make normative sense of the world, the normative problem? How do we connect, deeper connectiveness of our world? And then what are the values of theoretical problem as it is? So basically, these are some of the things in which we look at within this premise. So conclusively, we said that theory is a lens that we use to make sense of our world. Theory, a lens we use to make sense of our world. And we said the two main theories to do mainstream theories or the foundational theories in international relations are liberalism and realism. And then we have other theories, which are the critical perspective, which are Marxism, post-structuralism, social constructivism, post-colonialism, green politics, and feminism, and as many theories in which you can come up with. So yeah, so this is what I intend to cover for today. So I'm going to open up the class for questions and contribution, if there are any. Feedback, question, and contribution. Okay. Any feedback, question, contribution, anything you want to raise, or maybe from the theories in which you have raised, something is coming up to mind and you want to talk about it, or you want to share with us, this is the time to do that. Anything coming? Okay. If there's nothing that is coming, I'm going to leave it at that. So please prepare for an assessment next week. It's going to cover the 4 topics we have covered thus far. I suppose you all received my email during the course of the week. I sent you the material from week 1 to 3. Do you have anybody that did not receive that? Okay, the silence will imply that we all received this. So I'm going to send you this one. I'm going to send you this before the end of today. I will send you this one we just finished now. So please read extensively on it and read wide around these topics. So we'll see next week for an assessment. I will be passing along the format in which we'll be using for the assessment. Once that is sorted. Better still, I will ask, please write in the comment section, send me your official, your student email. I think some of you send me Gmails, right? So please write in the comment section your student email. I think I would prefer to have your student email so that if we can add your module for the assessment, that will be easier. So please write in the comment section your student emails. If that is, so please do that. And once that is done, that will be the end of the class. Thank you very much. I will see you when I see you next week.
See you.
Yeah.
See you and take care.
Okay. Please remember to type in the comment section your students' emails if you have yet to send me your students' email.